Welcome to a time when there were no guitars and no drums, just synthesizers. It was the 1970s. The place was Britain, and our heroes were a maverick bunch of young pioneers, obsessed by Kraftwerk and science fiction. All across the country, these synthetic dreamers would imagine the very sound of the future yesterday. And by the 80s, their dreams would become a reality, as Britain went synth-pop. Welcome to a time when machines ruled the world. By the 1970s, we were living in the future. Our cities were going space age. Victorian slums had been torn down and replaced by ultra-modern concrete high-rises. Entertainment also looked to the future. Our cinema and television screens were full of tantalizing glimpses of a future that seemed just around the corner. Released in 1971, Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange was a futuristic and violent vision of concrete Britain that captured the zeitgeist. The film's soundtrack was composed by American synth pioneer Walter, now Wendy Carlos. It would have a profound effect on a generation of would-be musicians.
That was probably a lot of people's maybe first time they'd heard electronic music, you know, on the score to that film. It made me forever associate classical music with people getting their heads kicked in, which is kind of a bit strange.
The soundtrack to Clockwork Orange, fantastic synth sounds in that, you know, big Moog synthesizer that Wendy Carlos used. And they were all orchestrated.
Well, Wendy, who then said she was Walter, I've never quite worked out what was going on there, was an absolute inspiration, you know. And the first time we'd ever heard that sort of absorbent synth-based sound, just raved about it.
Some of the people who would be the future post-punk people would listen to the 3 or 4 sort of original compositions that Carlos did on that soundtrack that were much more sinister and foreboding. There was a kind of a linkage made there between those sounds and the idea of a cold future, a bleak future, and that probably sort of sunk quite deeply into the psyche of a lot of young musicians at that time.
For a generation of electronic dreamers, Carlos's soundtrack would offer a glimpse of an alienated, synthetic future. But the true divine spark would arrive on our television screens in 1975. Tomorrow's World gave Britain its first glimpse of Kraftwerk, a German band who played only electronic instruments. They would invade our shores later the same year.
We played one of our first gigs, 1975, of our English tour in Liverpool. The Wings Over Britain tour was playing the same night in the town. That was also the reason why our hall was only half crowded. All of our posters were stuck right next to the posters of the Wings, so it made us proud, of course, you know.
Amazingly, they came to Liverpool in October of '75, and I sat in seat Q36 and witnessed the first day of the rest of my life. '75 was all, you know, the era of long hair and flared trousers and guitar solos, and these guys all came out in suits and ties. Two of them looked like they were playing electronic tea trays with wired-up knitting needles, and I was just blown away. It was incredible.
We had no long hair, we didn't wear blue jeans, we had suits on, grey suits, short hair, you know, and we looked like the children of Werner von Braun or Werner von Siemens. And we saw us so, you know, engineer musicians like that, instead of dancing boys on the stage to arouse the girls, you know. The interesting thing afterwards, there was a knock at our backstage door. It was a band. They were called Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark. And the leader, Eddie McCluskey, was really astonished and happy that he was meeting us in person. And he said, "You know, guys, you have shown us the future. This is it. We throw away our guitars tomorrow and buy all synthesizers."
In terms of inspiring people to not just have a synthesizer in their rock band, but to be completely electronic, I think you can never underestimate the impact of Kraftwerk. Trans Europe Express had the same impact on the synth poppers that Anarchy in the UK had on people who wanted to be punk rockers.
Next year, Kraftwerk hope to eliminate the keyboards altogether and build jackets with electronic lapels which can be played by touch.
In British music in the mid-70s, the synth was a remote beast. Although they would become much cheaper later in the decade, a synthesizer then could cost as much as a small house. They were associated with rich and technically gifted, progressive musicians.
Until punk came along, you had to be Keith Emerson. If you wanted to be in a band, you had to have learnt your instrument for at least 8 or 9 years before you would dare come out and play it. And it was simply the inspiration of The Damned and The Clash that said, get up and do it, you know. Do your best. If it's crap, maybe the simplicity will get you through.
Whilst the music didn't concern itself with synthesizers, the attitude of the punk movement would inspire those with an interest in electronic music to do it themselves.
All the infrastructure around punk we absolutely loved. It's just that the actual music we saw as being quite old-fashioned. And being a bit of a one-trick pony. So what we did was we took the attitudes of punk and gave it a different context, i.e. let's make music that nobody's heard before.
Across the country, small pockets of experimentation surfaced, inspired primarily by punk and Kraftwerk.
We're in my studio at home in southeast London. One day I opened my email inbox and there was like 10 emails from a very disparate bunch of people saying, you've got to go to eBay now and buy this. And what it was Kraftwerk's original vocoder, which was being sold on eBay. And it was the one that was used on Autobahn. I thought, well, this is the equivalent for a guitarist of getting Jimi Hendrix guitar that was used on Purple Haze or something, you know. I first got a synthesizer in 1977, and I bought a second-hand Korg 700S from Macari's music shop in Charing Cross Road. The thing that pissed me off about punk was you had to learn 3 chords to be in a punk band. If you had a synthesizer, all you had to do was press 1 key with a finger, you know.
I don't need a TV screen. I just stick the aerial into my skin.
Advances in technology in the late 70s heralded the invention of the affordable synth, costing no more than an electric guitar. Daniel Miller used his to form The Normal, an experimental act that supported punk groups. Miller drew on the work of English author J.G. Ballard, whose Crash was another futuristic vision of Britain.
Warm, leatherette. Warm, leatherette.
I'd just broken up with a girlfriend who I was very much in love with, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, read this book." I don't know, and I read it, and it sort of really had a huge. I have to using all these puns like impact, but it had a huge impact on it.
See the breaking glass in the underpass.
It wasn't like science fiction in the sense that it was outer space and stuff like that. It felt like it was 5 minutes into the future. And I loved that aspect of it, the fact that it was kind of so outrageous but so possible at the same time.
Leatherette.
Warm Leatherette by The Normal. The Normal was the alias of Daniel Miller.
Hear the crushing steel.
The lyrics are just a précis of some of the concepts in Crash, Ballard's novel, which was about people who have car accidents and find that thereafter their sexuality has been diverted and they're obsessed with being turned on by car crashes. So, you know, the lyric like, the handbrake penetrates your thigh, quick, let's make love before you die.
Warm, leatherette.
The music was supposed to be visual, you know, like driving along a highway with big buildings either side and going into a tunnel. There's quite a lot of humour in it, really. I mean, it wasn't meant to be like apocalyptic or dystopian.
Leatherette.
Miller was one of Britain's first synth punks, and he wasn't alone. In the north of England, a bunch of computer programmers dreamt of a similar future.
Well, we love J.G. Ballard, and in fact, you know, Roxy had a song 2HB about Humphrey Bogart, and we had a song for J.G., which was about J.G. Ballard.
The Future were a bunch of sci-fi nerds from Sheffield. They formed in '77 and played only synthesizers.
When I bought my Korg 700S in 1976, it was the first time there was a monophonic synthesizer which you could do stuff with, which was kind of domestic level, entry level in terms of price. It was 350 quid, I think. And I remember distinctly thinking at the time, I was a computer operator, and there was a decision day where it was either buy a second-hand car and learn to drive, or go and buy this monophonic synthesizer. And that proved to be quite a fateful day, because I still can't drive, but I still got that synthesizer.
This is a Mini Korg 700S, and was sort of the first affordable synth. A fantastic machine, completely eccentric.
Listen to the voice of Buddha.
They give you a book of patches with it, and because it was Japanese, that there would be things like Synthy Cat or Funny Frog, you know, and you can't follow why it's doing what it does, but it sounds great.
Usually with a synthesizer, you can get it to do something for you that you don't have to be manually good at all. That was why we turned to them in the first place, because no one could learn how to do the guitars either, because we'd all tried. My brother's a great guitarist, and he tried to teach me. It just hurts your hand. So we use these things, and you can press a switch on them, and they'll do things for about 10 minutes. It's quite interesting. If you've got a tape recorder, you can put it down, put something next to it, and it'll sound all right.
The day that I joined the band, Martin came round to my house, and he had two records under his arm. One was Trans-Europe Express, and one was I Feel Love. And he said, "Look, we can do this." I think that was his actual phrase.
We loved all that stuff. I mean, like the concept albums that Giorgio Moroder did with Donna Summer.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We used to play those continuously. And this wasn't some kind of post-gay, ironic something, it's just because they sounded great and interesting, and you're never really sure what the next set of sounds coming up was going to be.
I feel it just didn't sound like any record that had been before. It came on the radio and you couldn't quite believe what you were hearing. It was hypnotic, but it was driving.
Moroder's Moog music was the disco single of '77. Its success would set the template for the future of the future.
We were in fact much more influenced by Moroder than we were by Kraftwerk. Everyone, ever since anyone that knows we use synths, oh, you sound like Kraftwerk, don't you? Well, we use the same instruments, so some of the sounds are a bit the same. We never really wanted to be Kraftwerk. We wanted to be a pop band.
We wanted to embody a sense of futurism without being so literal. And it just so happened a friend of ours, he had bought for him this science fiction board game called Star Force.